This is Beyond the Weekend, a podcast of Cornerstone Church, where we dig into the things we didn't have time for on Sunday. Welcome to BTW. Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Weekend. I'm Mandy Fowler, Director of Spiritual Formation, and today I'm being joined by Pastor Alex Fernandez, our pastor down at our Heritage Hill campus. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
We are at the end of our More to the Story series, so this is week 9. Incredibly, we always say this, it goes fast. But here at the end of the book of Genesis, and, we've just touched on, obviously couldn't go through all, 50 chapters or so much we had to skip over. But we land, with a story of the sons of Jacob and kind of the significance of them, of who they are, and what that means for us. Yeah, there's a whole bunch that we kind of touched on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, these sons of Jacob.
Yeah, well, we had many conversations of like, how do we end this?
Right.
Because Genesis ends kind of differently.
Yeah.
In that it's not a wrapped up story like that started in Genesis 1 and 50, and it's like this whole buttoned up thing, and we'll get introduced to these sons, and I think we've been talking about this the whole time, that, in a culture where birth order is everything and all these norms are, this completely gets blown apart from the very beginning. We see the dysfunction, even in the family tree of Jacob, who God changes his name to Israel. So if you're out there and you're listening, you're like, how is this Israel? That it starts with that, but multiple wives, which in that day and age, not uncommon. Right. But we learn that he has a favorite wife, so that's kind of has dysfunction. We know that from the story of Joseph, he's got a favorite son. That's it. We talked about that dysfunction over the last couple of weeks, and then he's at his end of his life, and he's I guess got words of wisdom. He's given some prophecy. He calls all his sons together to tell him, here's what's to come. And so we get a glimpse of the more to the story from the God perspective through some of the words that are shared with his sons. And so, as we joked around, with some of them he says a lot, and some of them he doesn't say much at all. Yeah. And, it's kind of like you and I joked last week. It's like getting a fortune cookie, and you're like, the person next to you goes, you will have financial windfall this year. And you're like, oh, great. And I'm going to open up mine, and mine says, you're going to have some car repairs. Wait, what? And I didn't want a different one. Was this my fortune?
That reminds me, the worst fortune cookie I ever got said, use caution when walking alone in the dark.
It's scary.
Is this a threat?
Right? Yes. And so you get some of these statements that Jacob makes to his sons. They aren't that absurd, but some like you're going to be a mighty warrior, or a beacon for your people, or whatever some of the words are, and then some other words around, cooking delicacies for kings.
Right.
But then he's got some words for Judah, and the words for Judah, help springboard us into the bigger part of the story that's not only coming, but then we can tie that back to the beginning of the creation story and see God's hand of how invested he is in his creation, that he's not some aloof deity that just spun the world into existence and kind of sits back and picks and chooses who am I going to bless, who am I going to curse, am I involved at all? And no, God, I think we get a real clear image throughout this whole series and confirmation in these last final chapters that God is truly invested in his creation. Yeah. And we get a glimpse of that through Jacob's sons.
Right. Well, and I think there's just, even though we've only been able to, pull out certain stories from Genesis, we've seen this pattern developing of like, God really, he's not checked out. He's very engaged. He's very intentional. He's consistently just looking for people who will partner with him. Yeah. Who will choose to partner with him instead of going their own way. And when people keep going their own way, he continues to try to reach out, he's making promises. He's, he's doing everything to continue in this project of saving humanity from ourselves. And he's got this family, and as as challenging as they are, they have some major dysfunction, just like any family. This is who he's chosen to produce the story.
Ordinary people through which he works, and ordinary people on the behalf and who in who he is for. And there's comfort in that. That we can look at our own lives and think, well, I'm not that special. I'm not. Right. I'm just regular. Why is my problem bigger than anybody else's? But at the same time, that's who God is. He does work through people who are ordinary people. Flawed people, but also on behalf of ordinary people too, and that he sees those people.
Right. Yeah, so it's a really interesting. I think sometimes we think, there's a lot of that. Most of the books of the Bible are in the Old Testament. There's some long, there's whole books of law. There's ancestry in there. There's some really hard stories, complicated stories, and so sometimes I think we tend to not prefer to read from the Old Testament, depending on your background, depending on what you were taught. We might just sort of we know the big stories, we know the highlights, we know the things that we were taught in Sunday school maybe, but we tend to maybe ignore this. But this is this grand narrative of God that we're invited to participate in. And so we're missing out on some deep stuff if we ignore it.
That's what I've really appreciated out of this series, and I know you were central to that in the formation of this series, that we really took the perspective of trying to understand the character of God through these stories, not just learn these stories and what is the lesson in the story for me, but what does it teach me about God? And what is an eternal truth that I can hang on to from this story that God is revealing to us. We can never truly understand the magnitude and the awesomeness of God. As Tomlin would say, he's indescribable, but he gives us glimpses of those things that we can hang on to.
And I love doing that because, I don't know, I get a little grumpy sometimes. If you've been in church a long time, you can hear some stuff. We all have our sort of maybe pet things that frustrate us, especially those of us who are in the teaching team. We're always trying to find things that are fresh and different and coming from a different perspective or angle. And sometimes I get a little grumpy when we pull these stories from the Old Testament, and it's, and it's a human thing to, over-identify with the human in the story, and how are we like them or unlike them, or what can we learn from them, or what they did or didn't do. And so I think, and that's not bad, that makes sense for us to do, but to look at God and God's actions in the story, and what God does and doesn't do, in all of these, wild stories of people doing crazy things, or, I think for me, that's been really revitalizing. Especially, I've just loved and will continue to use the imagery that we've been using of the tree of partnership and the tree of independence. That's just, that was my golden nugget favorite part, I think, of the whole series.
Oh, yeah. Anytime we can get those moments where it helps click a different part of our minds and our hearts and help us remember. I like that too, is that, it's not a death tree and a life tree,
as you pointed out, who would ever pick the death tree?
That seems like such an easy pick, but if we put it down, or if we come at it from the perspective of, do I want independence or do I want partnership with God? Oh, okay. Well, now I understand the wrestle, because I can say I want partnership with God, but I can look at my life and see how I'm trying to live independent from that partnership, and so that's a daily struggle.
Right.
And so if you put it in that perspective, it changes everything with that story.
Yes. 100%. Yeah, because I think in the past, and I love anything that kind of puts new language to, things that you've heard 1,000 times before. And so sometimes we talk about sin as rebellion towards God.
Right.
And to me, the average person doesn't really resonate with that, because it's oh, well, I cheated a little bit on my taxes, or, called my brother a bad name.
Thinking about God.
They're not thinking about rebellion against God. They're, and so to frame it as choosing your own way over partnering with God, and as a daily decision, I just think that to me unlocks something for people and makes it a lot more understandable then of what our daily choices.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much. But
sometimes it comes together, doesn't it?
Yes, and I'm so grateful. And we've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast before, but this series in particular was a big challenge for us as writers.
Yeah.
Just because there was so much to unpack, and we're really going after what is the thing about God that we can pull out of the story that's really gonna, I don't know, light something up inside of people and help them see God in a different way.
Yeah.
That will maybe stick. And that was we got a little behind writing on this one because we were really going after that, but I think it has really paid off.
But the behind the scenes stuff that people don't see is we really wrestled with it, and when we landed on it, we felt like we got it. Yeah. We got it. Yeah. And it was worth the wrestling and worth the fighting because we weren't just trying to hit some high level fluffy stuff about God. We were really trying to ask ourselves that deeper question. The story can lend us to what can I learn from Jacob in this story.
Right.
But what are we learning about God in this story?
Yeah.
And it makes us wrestle with that question, ultimately so that it shapes, I think, the underlying theme, if people didn't get it, is that we were trying through this series to help people shape their view of God differently. Yeah. Because all the chaos and the disruption and the dysfunction that we see in these stories, absent of a clear image of God, you can form your own opinions of God based on your situation. And so that happens to a lot of people. It happens to all of us maybe on a constant basis where you have to, so what is it you're rooted in? What is it that is the foundation of your belief around who God is, so that when chaos comes, when dysfunction comes, when I don't feel loved, when I don't feel, all those things, that's at the foundation that is helping me feel grounded.
Yes. I love that. And I love, as we think about God being invested and how sometimes, there's a lot going on in the world and sometimes can feel like he walked away. Yeah. But to see that's absolutely not true. Like we just looked at one book of the Bible, just 9 stories. Yeah. And we see that's not true, you know, that God is deeply invested and pursuing us and calling us away from, these paths of independence we keep choosing. And I hope ultimately that these new kind of aspects of God that we pulled out help people. I hope the fruit is that people trust God more. Yeah. Trust the character of God, see these stories, can relate them into our own stories, as we heard on Sunday, we're grafted into the story. This is part of our story too. These people, we've been adopted into this family. Yeah. With all its warts. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating when you look at the Bible as a whole, because it's 66 independent books, but how they touch each other, even within Genesis, hitting the story, the words to Judah, talking about somebody who's coming, the he. Well, who's the he? It's kind of a mystery. Right. You can jump back to Genesis 3 and the conversation with Adam and Eve about their fall, and then he's talking to the serpent. And he references a he there too. Yeah. And so we have the benefit of maybe putting the pieces together, but God, this is the investment part of it, that God was putting a plan into motion, knowing all of the things that he knows. And, and then you tie that to the book of Revelation and John's words and just the specificity around him and his vision and saying, look, the Lion of Judah. And, it's tying back to this prophecy all the way back thousands of years before and this lamb who was slain and, it just shows God's investment into his creation and the detail and the just all in nature of God and he's grafted us all together, and those words from Galatians that you were just talking about, that we as followers of Christ are grafted and are Abraham's seed. So the words that he promised to Abraham, we can hold on true that he is going to, his people are going to be, the good news is coming to all people through this, right?
Bless all nations through this, I think that's, it's hard for us to comprehend because we're not a people of a long history in the U.S. Like we,
a couple hundred years.
We have just a couple hundred years. So we aren't thinking, the way that the Bible speaks of the past, God's saying stuff to the Israelites, like, remember, I'm the one who rescued you from slavery in Egypt. And he's saying that to people who didn't understand generations after that, know? And so for us to have this, it can be a little bit of a challenge for our minds to comprehend, but that we're part of this thousands of years of people engaging with God, inviting people into partnership. Yeah. And so that is a little bit mind blowing, and it should be, and especially hard for us to grasp as people who can trace our families back, a few generations usually, and then we kind of lose track when they're like, oh, I think they were over there in Europe somewhere or whatever. But to know that this is our spiritual family, and this goes back all the way to the beginning, and this is So it's a little mind blowing, and it should be, but I think it's good for us to think about humanity this way. Yeah. Anyway.
You asked me a question earlier. What's most sticking with you in this? And I love that you said the trees. I didn't think about it so specific. My reflection on this series is as much as I think I know about God in the Bible, there's so much more to learn.
Yes. Yeah.
There is. Yeah. And I can't sit here and say I did not learn.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the scriptures, and the beauty about God is God is just constantly trying to reveal himself in new ways to us.
Yeah.
And, when I say Genesis ends strangely, it's not this buttoned up book that you're like, okay, now you have God 101 done.
Right.
It just ends kind of abruptly with these 12 tribes going to inhabit a land, and then the books that follow, is the story of the Israeli people and the birth of that nation and all the things that come with it. But it's truly just, it's an invitation for us to now take it from understanding some of the characteristics of God to then, do you have a desire to know that God?
Right.
And so, it's part of our discipleship process that you guys have worked so hard on is this head, hands, heart, feet. Like, part of growing as a disciple is shaping all of those. Yeah. And do you have a desire to know God more? Head knowledge, heart opening, hands, feet, all those. Do you have a desire to go know more? And
right.
Because that's what this book is doing. It's inviting us to go do that.
Yes. I love that. Well, and it sort of, unlike, most things in life, like you can become an expert in something and you can learn all there is to know about a topic, but you can never reach the end of God, of knowing what God, there's always something more to learn about who God is and what God is asking and what God's trying to do in the world. And, and so there's always something more to know. And so, I think having that posture of, no matter how long you've been a Christian, I think I'm always thinking about the people who grew up in church and been around things for a long time and maybe feel like everything. And it's like, you definitely don't. There's always, God is endless and always has something more to show us, reveal to us about himself. And so, you figure that out by being around other people, by serving other people, and by using your talents and gifts, and by engaging with learning about scripture. And, these are the ways that we come to know God better. And that's the invitation of our lifetime.
Yeah.
The journey of our lifetime.
I hope people take that.
Me too. I mean, we are entering now into the season of Lent. It's a good transition as we look towards Easter. And we've got an Ash Wednesday service this Wednesday. I'll just pitch that really quickly. If you're listening, it's still time to go. I think this gets posted on Tuesday. So on Wednesday at 7 p.m. at Heritage Hill, we have an Ash Wednesday service. It's a great way for you to, kick off and engage in this season approaching Easter in a reflective, intentional way.
Yeah.
But as we move into now this series of sermons for Lent, it's all about the cross and Jesus on the cross and what we can learn from him in that. So, any last thoughts?
I enjoyed the series. I every time you're done with one, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
I almost forget about stuff as soon as I'm done with it because I have to move on to the next one.
Yeah.
But this is a good foundational one that I think you can come back to, to come back and remind, and just to maybe jot down like what was your takeaway, like Mandy shared, and put that somewhere so that when the storm comes, when the chaos breaks out, when the situation of life happens, that there's something there to pull you back to remind you of the character of God,
right?
And then also a spurring of your heart to continue to want to go and know more, and invest more. God's invested in you, and so when I know that people are invested in me, mentors or others, it makes me want to become better and just become the potential that those people who have poured in me see in me. And so that's how I look at this series is God's invested, not just in his creation, but in you personally.
Yeah. That's great. Good words. Good way to end this series. Hope you have gotten as much out of it as we have. And we encourage you to, come to Ash Wednesday or, just prepare your hearts for this Lenten season. We hope this next series is as much of a blessing as this one was. And we'll see you next time.